Well, two of the members, I believe, are dead, the bass player and the guitarist. And the only one remaining is the drummer. And Anne-Marie, the drummer's girlfriend, she eventually married the guitarist. And they're divorced, and she's moved to some other place. I think she might still be in Ontario, but she's moved away. So I haven't been in contact with her or the bass player. And the guitarist, when Q-Foreign came here to investigate my case, they arranged a hypnosis session for my dad as well, and he confirmed some of the stuff. And they also arranged a session for the guitarist, which he was nice enough to cooperate and go and attend, even though he didn't remember anything consciously. But Anne-Marie apparently did. She remembered little bits and pieces, even though he didn't remember anything. And the hypnotist told the investigators from Q-Foreign that she believes that the guitarist didn't want to remember, that he was blocking it purposely. And the drummer, he just found it to be kind of a nuisance. Now, I don't know if he remembers anything. He claims he doesn't. And but I don't think he understands that in most UFO abduction cases or contact cases, that they ask you to forget. They tell you that you're going to forget this incident. And so I don't think he remembers anything consciously. But I've always wanted to sit down with him and tell him what actually happened. And I've never gotten that opportunity to do that yet. But hopefully someday he'll agree to go out and have a coffee with me and just let me talk and tell him what happened. And then hopefully it'll trigger some part of his memory and he'll remember, you know. That's what I'm hoping. But I'm the only one that seems to remember the incident. And I did that out of sheer will because I didn't want to forget, you know. I'm very grateful that my dad remembered some of it, because that helped to give some validity to my account of the experiences. And my parents both pretty much accepted that this has happened and that it was real. And members of my family know about it, and I think they're of varying opinions. You know, some of them probably think I'm a little bit of an oddball or kind of off the wall, but others think, well, yeah, we've heard this stuff does happen, so maybe it's real. My friends, most of them have accepted, or at least pretended that they've accepted that this is real, that it has happened to me. One guy, actually a couple of them, have completely concluded that I'm nuts, because they don't believe in UFOs, and they definitely don't believe in aliens visiting us, and so that leaves them with only one alternative, that I have to be nuts. You know. So, funny. But I'm okay with that. You know, yeah. I know what happened, and so I don't really care what they think. I used to care at one time, but not anymore. I'm 62 years old now, and I figured I've earned the right to be weird, so It totally changed my perception of reality. I'm more accepting of possibilities of things that other people might consider impossible. I'm more open-minded, and it had an extreme effect on me spiritually. I got on a spiritual path once this happened, and one of the first things that changed my perception of religion was that I came to the conclusion that angels and aliens are the same thing, that they're just different perceptions of the same phenomena. And because I actually met them face to face and communicated telepathically with them, there was no going back. When something like that happens, it changes your whole perception of reality. And so I kind of got on a spiritual path. I've been questioned by people like Grant Cameron and others as to the spiritual nature of this stuff. And one of the questions I was asked was, did they give you any kind of a message? Well, yes, they did, but it went into my subconscious. I was hypnotized at the time, and so I don't remember. I remember that it was a mission that they gave me of some sort, but I don't remember the details of it. And I was told that I would remember at the right time. When the time is right, the information will be there. And over the years, my spiritual views or religious views have changed dramatically. Like I spent about, I guess maybe 15, 20 years as a Christian, and I was trying to make myself fit in the church that I was going to, and it just didn't seem to fit me. I didn't feel like I belonged there, like it wasn't making sense to me. And so I finally left the church, and I had some help from a couple of books by an author by the name of Bart Ehrman, and he wrote a couple of books called Lost Christianities, and I can't remember the name of the other. He's got several books out, and I've read a lot of his books. And basically, he started out as a Christian, and then when he dug into it deeper, he changed from an evangelical perspective to a historical perspective. And after reading his books, the same thing happened to me. His arguments made a lot of sense to me, and I now view the Bible as a book of, from a historical perspective. There's a lot of information there, but I don't agree with the evangelical aspects of it. I think there's been too much mingling in it with from the what we would call the cabal or the Illuminati, and a lot of things have been changed in it. We have only copies of copies of copies. We don't have the originals anymore. And so I kind of lost my faith in the evangelical aspect of it. And now I see it as a good history resource. And I've read a lot of the Gnostic books, the Nag Hammadi Library. That was one book that opened up my memory of before I was born on Earth, the pre-birth memories. It was a book in the Nag Hammadi Library that I was reading that triggered that memory and brought it out. But I've since kind of adopted this idea of that we're all connected, we're all one, and that we are all the one infinite creator or consciousness expressing himself through each individual. And so we have our individual traits, but when you get down to the deepest level of our being, we're all one, we're all connected. And so I've kind of adopted that idea. I also read some books, a lot of science books, like the Holographic Universe, and I've listened to what Elon Musk has to say about it, and I agree with him. I do believe that we are living in a simulated universe, a holographic universe. And so my ideas have all been influenced by my encounters, and they've changed accordingly. Well, I was reading the Nag Hammadi Library on my lunch hour. I worked at a hardware store about 20 years ago, and I was out in my van, and that was around the time, I guess, when Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code, had come out. And in his book, he states that a lot of what he got about Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene and having a son was influenced by the Nag Hammadi Library. And so before I bought Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code, I went and bought the Nag Hammadi Library, which is a big, thick book, like 1.5 inches thick or so. And I thought, I'm going to read this first before I read his book and see if I reach the same conclusions that he did. Then I'll read his book and see how they compare. And so when I read the Nag Hammadi Library, I was reading this part about a high place that was, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was about a high place up on a ridge, and the earth was visible from there, and you could see it out in space. And when I read that, it was like something popped open in my mind, and this flood of memories just came back. And I remembered standing on the edge of a crater, and I believe it was on the moon. And this was before I was incarnated in a human body. I was standing there, and there was a gray being beside me, and he was telling me that I had to go down there. And we were on this high place looking out, and I could see the earth hanging in space like a big beach ball. And I remember arguing with him, telling him I didn't want to go. And anyway, later when I became a Christian, I remember reading the scripture about how the devil took Jesus up to a high place and showed him all the kingdoms of the earth after he'd done this 40-day and 40-night fast. And the devil told him, I will give all this to you if you do one act of worship to me. Well, that high place, I believe, may have been this place that I remember, where I was standing on the edge of this crater looking out at the earth, because how else could you see all the kingdoms of the earth? You'd have to be pretty high up, you know. And so that's how I felt this was the same place. And I think it's kind of like a launching pad where they send you, where they send souls to earth. That's where it begins. They show you the earth and tell you you have to go down there. And so I was arguing with this being, and I believe his name was Rigel. And I told him I didn't want to go. And he said, well, you have to go. He said, it's been decreed by the higher ups. So I said to him, well, what if I say no? What if I don't go? And he said, well, believe me, there's a lot worse places they could send you than Earth. You know? And I took that as like a personal threat that I had to agree to this. And he said, why don't you want to go? And I said, because I've heard so many horrible things about Earth, and I just don't have any interest in going there at all. And when I remembered that I had said that, it then occurred to me that I had heard so many horrible things about Earth meant that this is my first incarnation here, that I've never been here before. Otherwise, I would have said, well, I know so many horrible things, you know. So that's how I came to the conclusion that this life that I'm in now is my first incarnation here. So this being told me, he said, well, he said, there's a guy that just has returned from a life on Earth. And he said, maybe if you talk to him, it'll alleviate some of your fear. And so I said, oh, well, okay. And so immediately I was transported into this room. It was like a barren room, nothing on the walls, no furniture except for one chair in the middle of the floor. And it was dimly lit. And this guy was sitting in the chair with his head hung low, and he just looked so sad. And I walked up to him and I said, I understand you just came back from Earth. And he looked at me and he just kind of nodded. And I said, well, what was it like? I said, was it good or was it bad? And he said, well, it's kind of a bit of both. And I said, well, is it more good than bad or more bad than good? Or how is it? And he said, well, I'm really not the right person to be asking this to. And I said, well, let me put it this way. If you had to go back, would you go? And he said, well, that's the thing. He says, I do have to go back. And I said, why? And he said, because I didn't complete my mission there. And at that point, it just suddenly occurred to me that he'd killed himself, that he never made it through his incarnation on Earth. And immediately after I stepped back from him, I was back on the ridge with this gray being beside me again. And he said, did you talk to him? And I said, oh yeah. And he said, well, did he alleviate your fears? And I said, no. I said, if anything, he made me even more fearful of going. So this being said to me, he said, if you he said, I'm going to, let's see. No, I said, if I decide to go there, will you come and check on me every now and then? And he said, yes. He says, I will do that. And I said, well, then I guess I'll go. And when I said that, I agreed to it. And that was it. Then I was committed. I had to go. So it turns out that this being that said he would come and visit me ended up being the leader in the incidents I had. And that was how he kept his part of the agreement, that he would come and check on me every now and then. And he did. He checked on me when I was a child, when I was a toddler. I remember him coming into my bedroom one day, and so it's it all kind of fits together, you know, because I'd wondered, why me when these incidents happened to me? Why me? And when I remembered that, then I knew why. It was because I'd asked him to. I have done some that were published in the Q-Form Bulletin. Let's see if I can find them here. This is the one that I drew of the being that was, I believe, to be the leader of this this group, and this is what the ship looked like, and the lights panning back and forth underneath it on the pavement, and the doorway of the ship, and there's I've shown the lights around the perimeter that were glowing, and the recessed portholes. So that was one of the sketches that I did, and this is a sketch that I did of the light that he shone on my arm, and what it basically looked like. And this is what their eyes looked like. And I have them going off where it curves up the side of their head, and they could actually look at you from a 90-degree angle. And I believe that's how when the being went by the window of the van and I saw the side of his head, he was actually looking in at us at that time. And it didn't bounce like he was taking steps. It just was like a fluid floating by, you know. Yeah. As an artist, and I've done a lot of cartoon drawings, and I always do this sort of scribble for the collar, and it looks like a collar like this, and I didn't really realize that that's what I'd done when I drew the alien, but I don't believe that the collar was actually like that. I believe it was more like a Nehru collar that came up the neck, and you know, almost like a priest would wear, sort of. But the outfit that they were wearing had it seemed to be like a one-piece jumpsuit, and the shoes or the boots were part of the suit, like they were connected. Everything was all one piece. And they had some sort of an insignia on the shoulder and also on the chest, I believe. And I wasn't sure what the insignia looked like, and under one of the hypnosis sessions, Harry Tokars helped me to remember. He asked the hypnotist if he could take over for a minute, and she said sure. And he asked me to look at the insignia, and he said, now focus in on it. And he said, you'll be able to see it really clear now. You can see that insignia very clear. Remember what it looks like, because I want you to draw it after. And so I did do a drawing of it. Cool. And even so, I don't know how accurate the drawing is, but I drew what I saw in my mind, you know. I have, but for some reason, all these experiences seem to have come to an end around 1976. They just stopped. And I'm not sure why, but years later, I'm still wondering why they stopped. And I've tried to contact them telepathically many times and never got any response. But I remember Bud Hopkins told me once that once you have your case investigated, they leave you alone. They don't bother you after that. And I'm not sure why, but so that could be part of the reason that I haven't had any more experiences with them since. But the experiences that I have had, I remember a lot more clear. I've got a lot more details. In fact, I asked Dr. Clamar if she would mind giving me a post-hypnotic suggestion to help me remember over the next few months or years, to remember more of it, have it come out And she did that for me, and I believe it worked. Because often, the more I tell the story, I start to remember little things that I didn't remember before, like the drummer hitting his head on the doorway going in the ship. I didn't remember that until quite a bit later on, you know. Little details like that seem to be surfacing.